Hello, everyone. This is Dread from Miss Valley Entertainment News. Give me one moment. Sorry about that. So, this is going to be a very quick review of Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire. I just finally sat down and watched it and thought I'd give my thoughts on it. Um, I thought it was a good movie. Um, I would say the first half I was thinking it's a good movie, but not a great movie. Through the second half, I thought it picked up a lot, not so much just in pacing, but just overall picked up in my estimation. So it went from the first half of the part one here being just good to the second half of the picture being somewhere between good and great. Um, I thought the characters were very interesting. They made me want to learn more about some of them. Some of the ones we didn't get as much knowledge about, for sure. The world that was created by Zack Snyder in this was quite fascinating. It was very, very brutal. Um, very there's a lot more sci-fi elements to it than Star Wars. I feel like Star Wars is still a fantasy movie or set of movies or universe, even though it is sci-fi. But this was more sci-fi. I mean, Star Wars, you look at stormtroopers and other people, with smugglers and whatnot with laser blasters, the stormtroopers with their laser rifles, right? And you get the spaceships and you're all the different things, and you still don't always see it as a sci-fi. I mean, it's not Star Trek, right? It's Star Wars, and it's different. It adds enough fantasy elements, and we're not talking, medieval fantasy necessarily or Tolkien fantasy, but it adds enough fantasy elements into Star Wars that you kind of lose track of the fact that it's a sci-fi movie sometimes, or sci-fi universe. Rebel Moon is far more grounded in sci-fi than fantasy. That's my opinion on that. So the bad characters they felt more like just very, very nasty invading space marines, if that makes any sense, rather than the stormtroopers who, you know, just by being all dressed the same and having armor on and faces covered, seemed to be more mysterious, if you want to put it that way, when we first introduced them. Whereas the troopers here are just, they're different. They're more sci-fi. They're more sci-fi than fantasy. Kind of see where I'm getting at. I thought, again, the characters are good. I thought the pacing was actually pretty good. And I say that in that the pacing wasn't wildly back and forth. For sure, the first half of this movie was slow paced. It just was. But if you go back again to the original Star Wars, and I'm going to compare this to Star Wars a lot, why wouldn't I? Zack originally wrote this script for Star Wars and then changed it. If you go back to the original Star Wars, A New Hope, the beginning of that movie was pretty slow paced. It was introducing you to Tatooine. It was introducing you to, at times to the universe abroad, right? To the way of life of the moisture farmer without real hope. But then there's Luke, who has this hope of going off and, who knows what, and then it happens. In this case, this movie's almost the opposite of that, because the heroine of the story, she's been out there. She's done terrible fucking things. And you don't really even know what happened to her, why she's no longer doing those terrible things. You just know she isn't anymore, and she's been laying low. And she's an interesting character, but she's kind of almost an anti-Luke, which is interesting. You do have your brief kind of look at a dashing rogue a la Han Solo a little bit, right? You've also got the simple farmer a la Luke Skywalker, but the characters are still very different. yeah, they're kind of loosely, really loosely based, but the characters are different. They flesh them out differently, and it's a different world, so it has to be a different look at things. So the pacing I thought was very slow over the first part, and then it picked up towards the last half of the movie for sure. I thought it was very well paced at that. You do have to kind of get through the first half though. There's a lot of good in the first half. Don't get me wrong. I just think you have to get through it to get to the part where it picks up a little bit more. And as the pace picks up, it becomes more interesting because your heartbeat gets going. You're moved along in the story a little quicker. Um, that's another thing. That one thing I did kind of have a problem with is the main character at one point literally spends like what feels like 10 minutes explaining her backstory to somebody. I think a backstory needs to come out more organically. If you've got a complex character who has a history, they have a past, you want that backstory to come out, but maybe you want it to come out more in bits and pieces. I think they gave far too much in one big chunk, and that's not a natural thing for people to want to just, hey, here's my life story. You know, that to me felt a little unnatural in the writing. Other than that, I thought the writing was pretty good. I thought the acting was good. I don't think any of the actors did any kind of a poor job here. Um, the I again I don't know the names of the characters and I don't have them in front of me. The main bad guy in this first film here reminded me more of Wexler from Resident Evil. Um, and if you've seen the movie, maybe this movie, maybe, and you've seen Resident Evil stuff, maybe you know what I'm talking about. But he really reminded me more of Wexler. It's just fucking impossible to kill. He just keeps coming back. I really was surprised when he had like the shirt, the button up shirt, and the thin black skinny tie out of the '80s. I just thought that was a neat look to think that in our future or in this other universe, people wore ties. I don't know. I found that amusing. All in all, man, the cinematography was great. Some of the scenes where you could see the sky and the moon and stuff on the farming planet were amazing. Um, didn't show a lot of space, but there was a lot of kind of uh, cold, dark areas where it was just metal and industrial and ships coming and going. And that was all well done. The ships are much more gloomy and foreboding and dangerous looking than Star Wars, I would say. This whole thing, I understand why it's got like an adult tone to it. It's not because there's a bunch of sex in it or any titties or anything else. Um, it's because it's a very dark movie and it's set in a very dark place. Zach, I know Zack Snyder wants to build this out into its own universe, have many movies, TV shows, books, comics, video games, the whole deal, and I hope he pulls it off. I think it'd be amazing. But I do think one thing I want to see, and I'm hoping we see a little bit of it in the next movie, but I don't know if we're going to. But going forward, some point, Mr. Snyder, I would love to see something in this universe where there's happiness, where there's joy, where there's bright colors and people, there's got to be pockets of that in this universe. I mean, you've got a pocket right at the beginning of people who are on their own. They're working the farms, building their community, but it's still very drab, and it doesn't feel happy. I'd like to see happiness somewhere in here. And I know, Zach, you don't write that real well, but I think you need to show both sides. It doesn't have to be equal on each side, but I think you got to show that there is that out there, um, and show it in a good way. Actually show it, not just say it. So that's a challenge for Mr. Snyder. What else can I say about this? I do believe that this was I don't want to be insulting in any way. This was not it didn't always feel like a story. It felt like an introduction. It very much probably the first half of the movie at least. In fact, the whole movie, but for sure the first half felt like not so much we're telling this self-contained story, although they were, but more along the lines of this is an introduction to this universe. that's kind of how I view this whole story that has laid out he's laid out in Rebel Moon Part 1 Child of Fire. It's an introduction to the universe he's created as well. He's introducing us by telling us a story, and showing us people's humanity, people's hope, people's hopelessness, the darkness, the crushing defeats, the viciousness, the whole deal. But he's also saying, but this is the whole thing. Take a look at the whole thing, because there's so much more to unfold. And I'm very anxious, not anxious, I'm very interested in seeing what more Mr. Snyder can bring out in this. Um, and does he allow other people in to play with his universe going forward too? That'd be interesting. So I hadn't yet thought, because I just watched this movie, about how I would rate it. But now I'm going to be put on the spot, and I'm going to get a rating out of 10. And I'm going to say Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon Part 1, The Child of Fire, I would rate 8.6 out of 10. It was a little better than good. Climbing towards great. Certainly not superb or perfect. So, and I think, superb, perfect will be 10, superb will be 9. So, yeah, I'm giving it an 8.6. It is a very solid movie. If you have the time to sit down, it's a little over 2 hours. You have the time to sit down and watch it and pay attention to it and not be distracted by other things, and just, like me, put a pair of headphones on and just watch it. I think you'll like the movie. Don't expect Star Wars. It's not Star Wars. It was just based on a script written for the Star Wars universe that he has obviously changed for this. So it'll get compared to Star Wars a lot, because Star Wars was kind of the first of its kind, and everything gets compared to it. So that's fair. That's just the way it is. It's not Star Wars. It's definitely more brutal. It's definitely more bleak, and it's definitely more sci-fi. And there's, I think, a lot of interest in just what else this universe holds, even just beyond the part 2 that's later. I'm thinking it comes out December of 2024, right? I believe. Just my interest is what else is out there in the universe. What other stories? What other settings? What other planets? What other heroes? What else is there to show? Because once you create a universe, you can go anywhere, meet anyone, and tell any story you want. And this, I hope, pays off for Mr. Snyder. I know he's shown a lot of passion for this. I hope the fans reacted the same way and say, go for it. We will take this in. You feed it to us. We'll eat it. Bring it. Because I want to see what else he can do. So that's my review of Rebel Moon. I consider it a movie well worth watching. I say, if the critics are still saying it's terrible, don't pay attention to them, because it's not terrible at all. It's definitely not a terrible movie. I don't know where the critics are getting that. And critics were also saying it was a Star Wars copy. That is BS. It is not a Star Wars copy. Not at all. So, yeah, don't pay attention to the critics. I don't think the critics like Zack Snyder to begin with. Most of them, I don't think, do. They have something against him, and I think they're judging his picture here on that. So don't pay attention to the critics. Go see it for yourself. I'm not a critic. I'm just giving you my honest review of it. So for Mist Valley Entertainment News, my name is Dread, and that was my review of Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon Part 1, The Child of Fire, which I enjoyed. 8.6 out of 10, people. Let me know down below. Did you watch this movie? What did you think of it? And how would you rate it out of 10? And I'll await your answers, and I will read them and reply to as many as I can. Everybody, take care. Bye-bye.